My name is Bas de Veer and I'm the local REDCap guy, as I like to call it. I pretty much deal with everything REDCap related here at the ITHS. What we're going to do today is get you guys going with REDCap, give you an overview of what is REDCap, and actually put you on your way to build your own project and collect some data. I'm going to do that by first introducing REDCap, tackling some practical issues, mostly legal stuff, and getting access to REDCap. And then some basic project workflow, which is going to be by far the biggest part of this lecture. And finally, an interactive Q&A. If you have any questions during my presentation or monologue, feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to answer it right there and then. So what is REDCap? REDCap is a clever little acronym that stands for Research Electronic Data Capture. It is web-based, meaning that you can access it from any device that has an internet connection. Because of that, it's also cross-platform, so you can use it on a Mac or a Windows machine or a tablet or whatever. It's fairly secure. We have very strict security measures. We are fully HIPAA compliant, so you can store personal health information on this. And specifically, it was built for researchers by researchers that were kind of fed up by having to put all their research data in Excel or in an Access database and saying like, there should be an easier way to do this, which is more secure and more easy to use. And finally, what I think is a really, really great aspect of REDCap is the high degree of customizability. As for some reason during your project, your PI comes to you and says, well, I kind of want to add this specific scoring tool halfway through to the protocol. You can do that. You don't have to do a lot of reprogramming to add that in there. So if in the same way you want to delete data or edit an existing form, you can do that. So you have a lot of control over your own projects. Some background statistics, which I always like to mention. It was created by Vanderbilt University in 2004, and they're still actively developing it. Mainly every 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks if it's a holiday in between, they release a new version. Some of them are just bug fixes, but most of them actually have new functionality in there. We try to upgrade every 2-3 months depending on the new features coming out. So it's a project, or it's a program that's being actively developed and being improved pretty much all the time. Globally, it's over 1,200 institutions in 87 different countries, over 140 different projects that are actually live and collecting data. And they're edging up to the 200,000 user mark, so that's kind of nice. We've been hosting it here at the ITHS or the UW since 2009. We have over 2,000 projects active at this point, of which 800 are in production, meaning that they're actively gathering data and put on the data security features associated with the production mode. Over 250 IRB projects. I think it's close to 300 at this point in time, but I haven't run the numbers lately. And we just passed 2,000 users a month ago, so we have a lot of active users. So chances are that if you go around the Seattle research community, people have used our REDCap installation before. So why use REDCap if that was in doubt? I always like to highlight its accessibility, meaning that you don't have to have a fancy password with a lot of VPN capabilities or some other high-tech IT mumbo-jumbo that usually goes wrong. You can just go to the website, log in, and there's your data. However, it's still secure. It always encrypts its signals, and it's fairly hard to get into the data center where the thing lives. The ease of use is always a good point, of course. People that don't have any programming experience should be able to use REDCap. It was built specifically for that purpose, for people that have no clue how to do HTML or Java or C# or any of the other programming languages out there. As I said, you have a high degree of control and also a lot of quality control. There's a lot of logging involved in REDCap. There's a couple of features that you can use to query on your data, check the quality of your data, and fix it. Flexibility or customizability, I mentioned that. A lot of flexibility is good in the research field, and you have all the autonomy in the world. If everything goes according to plan, you won't need me at all. You can do this thing all by yourself. And finally, yeah, I say that I would love that, but it kind of kills my own job security. But on the, on the other hand, the fact that we have 2,000 users and there's only one person actively supporting it speaks volumes for the ease of use, in my book. And I also mentioned the wide user base. Because we have so many users, people, they can afford to have me on board, giving these training materials and basically upping the institutional knowledge within Seattle. A lot of people ask me specifically about security because they need it for their IRB applications. So I made a little slide about that. How REDCap is set up security-wise is that we host it underneath UW Tower. There's a big data center there for people that don't know that, which is really hard to get into. It's like Fort Knox with various key cards and guards and stuff. So really hard to get to the actual physical device. To get to it to the web, it is encrypted via an 128-bit encryption. For the people that don't speak IT that much, that's the same encryption Google uses for most of its Gmail. So fairly secure to get into. As long as they don't have your username and password, your connection should be secure. Because of that, it's fully HIPAA compliant. We got tested by the UW Medicine IT department, and we are still being monitored by them. And so far, there hasn't been any problems with that. However, any system that's shut down completely security-wise is, of course, not very good because you need to access it. So to access any data within REDCap, we have a 3-tiered access system. The first is having a UW-Net ID. If you have that, you can log into our REDCap instance and yeah, you're in, you have an account. The second level is the project access level, meaning that you either create your own new project or you could get added to somebody else's project as a user. And then finally, the third level is user restrictions within a specific project. I, for instance, can say, you three can only see the first form in my specific project, you three can see everything, and you can only run a report, for instance. Or I could do any different subsets of that. So the user restrictions or user rights are fairly pervasive, and it's the final level to really tailor who can see what. We have a really extensive logging feature for audit trails. It is bigger than the database itself and has been for some time. Pretty much everything you do within REDCap gets logged. I actually used a lot to see what's going on with somebody's project when they have an issue. And if you want to bug the IRB or some other monitoring institution about that, you can print the entire thing to a PDF and say, enjoy, here's 3,000 pages of logging files. And finally, REDCap has a fairly pervasive de-identifying feature, meaning that you can basically tag any variable within REDCap as being identified. If it's, for instance, a date, it gets date shifted with a random number. If it's a name, that just gets taken out straight out of the identified data set, and it's a push of a button. So the export module has that by itself. There's also a user right that you can turn on for a specific user, saying, okay, you can only export the identified data instead of the full identified data set. Some cost overview. Question for you, was it free? So there's no charge. You can use it as long as you want. We here at the ITHS are funded on a CTSA grant to 2017, but we are going for a renewal, 5-year renewal until 2022. I'm fairly certain we should get that. However, I did get some guarantees from some of my supervisors that for some reason, if that fell through, who knows, Obama's out of office and the next guy or girl basically kills all funding to NIH, the university would take over this project because it's so popular. So chances are that you are going to be able to run your project long term. What that includes is some basic level of support. These classes, for instance, is considered basic level of support. Some online documentation, and this is a very handy feature if you have a specific project in mind, but you're not sure on how to go about it and setting it up in REDCap because it's a little bit more complex. You can get me to go sit down with you for an hour or two to actually hash out how to do it and how to best set that up in REDCap. However, if you then want me to build it for you, I start charging. That's because my time is not infinite, so yeah, we do need to charge for that. So my rule of thumb is that if you can do it yourself in REDCap and you want me to do it, I'm charging you for that. If you can do it, it falls under basic level of support. We have a couple of other things that we charge for. One of them is EMR data import and export. We have the ability to pull data from Amalga, the data warehouse from the UW system, ported directly into REDCap. It's really handy if you're doing a data abstraction for a large amount of people and you're all looking at the same data. You just pull all the data in REDCap, annotate it, and you're done. The other two are recovering data if it's deleted by user error, which hasn't happened in the 2 years that I've been doing this, mainly because there's so many safeguards in there. If you would have to actively disregard all those safeguards and my numerous emails saying like, please don't delete this because you will lose your data before you, So if you then come to me like, yeah, I want you to restore that backup that you run daily, it takes us about 8 hours to boot up another instance of REDCap, restore all that data from a backup and get you your data. So as a result, we charge you for that. Also, if you have a high rate of post-production changes, basically if you email me 20 times a day, I'm going to give you a couple warnings. Also has never happened before. But it's officially part of our charge list, so I have to mention it. Responsibilities, a lot of text. The Cliff Notes version of this is that we are responsible for hosting REDCap, upgrading it, maintaining it, making sure that no bad people get onto our servers. You are responsible for your own project, for running it, for defining who has access to what and which functionality, that user right restriction I was talking about. If you are using proprietary tools, for instance, copyrighted validation tools or something, you are responsible for paying the fees or providing compensation for the people that have that copyright. For the rest, fairly straightforward. I'm going to send everybody this slide deck anyway after the class, so read through this when you get it. I think most people had a UW NetID. However, if you have, for instance, a multi-site project and you need to basically get other people's IDs for REDCap, have them go to this link. This is a short survey, about 10 questions max, asking you, okay, who are you? Who is your contact here at the UW or Children's or the Fred Hutch? And why do you want a UW NetID for REDCap? If you do that, if that person does that, I'm going to look at it, see is this kosher enough, yes or no, and then going to put in a request for a deferred UW NetID. Deferred UW NetIDs are free, they don't have any email boxes, you pretty much can only use it to get on the Wi-Fi and access our REDCap installation here. So, but they're really handy for all those people that are outside of the UW system. If you do have one of these IDs, you don't have to go through that process. You can just log in and then be done with it. REDCap works on a system that you have to log in once for you to be able to show up as a user. So you can look up other people within REDCap that have an account. However, you cannot look up everybody that has a UW NetID. That would be fairly extensive. I think they create something north of 50,000 UW NetIDs a year. So if we would have a master list of all those people, that would be a lot of UW NetIDs. So basically you can only look somebody up in REDCap as a user if they logged in at least once. If they logged in once, then they're good. Same goes for any of these other IDs. Some general orientation. Once you log into REDCap, you're going to see this screen. Don't worry, I'm going to blow it up because this is a little bit vague. You're going to see a couple tabs, the Home tab, the My Projects tab, Request New Projects, Training Resources, and Help and FAQ. There is a basic timeout window of 30 minutes, so if you leave for the day, after 30 minutes, REDCap will kick you out. You will either have to log in again or hit the Log Me In Again button. Going into REDCap, it will look like this. It's a little bit more big. So the Home button is probably going to be the first tab you're going to land into when you're creating a new record. It has a lot of information about REDCap. Most people glance through it and say like, great, that's not why I'm here. You're usually going to end up in My Projects. My Project is this huge list of all your active projects. Because I do nothing else all day, I have a lot of projects. Most people have 2, 3, 4 projects. Some people have a little bit more. Clicking on any of these links will take you directly to that project. You can see some quick statistics about each project, for instance, the number of records. If you have a survey active, for instance, this is the new outside user survey I just talked about. I have 654 different surveys filled out to this day. The number of fields, that's the number of variables, what type of instruments are in there, the type of project, if it's a classical or a longitudinal project, more about that later, and then whether it's in production or development. So, quick overview of all your active projects at this point in time. Then we have the create a new project, where you boot up a new project, more about that later. Some training resources. These are all short videos. Well, there's one longer video, 78 minutes, but most of them are shorter, which highlight specific functionality within REDCap. REDCap has a couple of these links sprinkled out through the program itself. So for instance, if you don't know what a field type is, chances are there's a link to the video where you actually use field types. However, if you need to look something up, chances are it's in here. You can just click on it and watch it. The help and FAQ is a very long document with pretty much all the questions that came up in the last decade, and basically put in a form where you can look it up. There's a couple of tables in there that you need, for instance, for syntax or for text validation types like this, or if you, for instance, have Spanish characters in there and you want to hard code them in, there's a table with Spanish characters and how to hard code them in. So fairly comprehensive FAQ. You guys won't have the control center because that's only for administrators. So requesting a project basically goes through a couple steps. First, you need to give it a name. Most people start with a test project. I highly advise everybody to have at least one practice sandbox test project where you can just try out all the features, no active real data in there, so you can go nuts. You can have as many of these as you want, feel free to do so. After you give it a name, let's say test, it's going to ask you for a purpose. So if you are doing it as a test project, select other and select test or training or whatever. If you are going to use REDCap for a research project, select research. It's then not going to ask you for a PI name, IRB number, etc. All of that is not mandatory, but we really would like you to fill it out. If you don't know it at that point in time, you can fill it out later. Mainly because if we have that IRB information, we can tell the NIH that funds us, look at us, we have 300 people using this that have different IRB numbers. The other ones, operational support and quality improvement, speak for itself. So after you've done that, you're going to select a project type. There's basically two types. You have a blank slate, which starts with the bare bone things, nothing activated, only one form with one variable in there, because REDCap needs that one variable to store data. But for the rest, it's totally blank. Only use that when you're really comfortable with REDCap, so I know exactly what I need and I want to start from scratch. If you don't know what you know yet, or you want to test it out, we have a number of templates in there. This is the list is a little bit longer, ranging from a very simple survey with one form to a 2-arm longitudinal study with 5 events and 9 forms in it, which is fairly complex. Once you load a template in there, you can adjust and modify it to your heart's content. It won't impact the original template, obviously. So it's a really good way of saying, okay, this is how a longitudinal project or survey looks like and what I need to fill out. If I quickly demo that, I go to request new project, give it a title, training, for instance, December, select the purpose. If I do practice, nothing happens. Research, it's going to ask me that other stuff. Let's just do practice for now. This is that blank slate template thing. If I select template, there's a bunch of different options in here. So I have the ability as an administrator to add templates to this list. So for instance, I've added this one that we developed in-house, which is an adverse events tracker for oncology purposes. If you're not in the oncology field, probably shouldn't bother with that, but if you are in that field, feel free to use it. It's free. If you have a project that you think, okay, more people would benefit from that, shoot me an email and I'll evaluate it for use and we can put it in there. So, but let's say we just want to do a single survey project. I select that, hit create project, or it will be a request project for you guys, and the project will be created. That brings us to the approval process. There's basically two points in any lifespan of a project where I'm going to be actively involved. One is project creation. Main reason for that is that we want to keep a handle on how many projects are created and who is creating them. For instance, if you are going to send me 5 project requests with the same title, I'm thinking, okay, either something's wrong with your computer or your internet connection got lost or something, and we're only going to approve one of them. So that's a little bit of a double check for us. It also basically keeps the number of necessary projects down, which ensures the smooth operations of our REDCap instance. The more projects, the slower it runs. So if we have only the projects we need, it runs the smoothest. That's the idea behind it. The second time point is the production approval. You can move any project from its default state, which is development, where you can develop your project, into production. The functionality between the two is pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is that if you want to make any changes to your project in production, it has to go through an approval process. Basically, I'm going to double check your work to make sure that you don't lose any data. For instance, if you delete a variable that has already data captured in it, that would be a clear data loss, because once you delete that variable, you delete all the associated data with it. It would be a bad thing. Same with if you mess around with options, for instance, for some of the structured variables, that might cause you data loss. I am double checking it, and if I see anything that raises a red flag, I'm going to shoot you an email with the consequences of your actions, and you have the final say, yeah, I'm sure, delete this, or no, thank you for warning me, reset it, and I'll do it myself. So I'm usually the person doing this. However, when I'm on holiday, other people do this for me, and we do this within 1 business day. So if you do it on Friday night, chances are I'm only going to approve it on Monday morning. So that's a thing you have to be careful with. Once you have your new project, you're going to basically spend a lot of time in the project setup page, because that's where you're going to set up your entire project. The main project settings, we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's where you set up longitudinal functionality, surveys, and titles. Instrument design, this is the one where you can spend most of your time, because this is where you create your variables and your forms. Event design, if you do have a longitudinal project, you want to declare some events, saying baseline, month 1, month 2, month 3, etc. So you kind of want to define that and link the appropriate forms to the appropriate events. That will only show up when you have longitudinal mode on, so if you have that off, it won't even show up because you don't need it. Then some modules that can allow you to tailor some of the functionality within your project. Some bookmarks. Bookmarks are different from your normal bookmarks in your browser because they're linked to the project itself and not so much the browser on the specific computer. So let's say you have a protocol PDF you want all the project members to share. Just add it as a bookmark, and then they will always have the latest and greatest version. You don't have to email 50 people saying like, please check this PDF of the protocol. Then we have user rights. I say it's optional if you're the only user in the project. You don't really need to mess with user rights. However, if you have 2 users, it's a good idea to check it out, and it becomes not as optional. Again, more about that later. Then the move to production button. That will actually move you from development to production. You are totally fine if you want to run your project in development because you don't want my nosy nose nosing through your project. However, I highly recommend it because it does safeguard you from the mistakes that inadvertently delete your data. So let's go to the project setup page. So I'm going to go quickly over all these things because it looks fairly busy, but once you get the gist of it, it's actually fairly simple. Top left is your main navigation, who you're logged in as. You can go back to my projects, that big project list I just was in. Project home and project setup correspond with these 2 tabs over here, and your project status, which is development at this point. Below that is the data collection window. This is dependent on the functions you turned on. For instance, this is a longitudinal project with surveys in it, so I need a manage survey participant button, but also a scheduling feature because, yeah, it's longitudinal. Record status dashboard and add edit records will be there always, regardless of what you turn and that's usually how you start collecting data. Underneath there we have applications. If you don't have user rights to any of these applications, they don't even show up. However, I see all of them because I'm an admin. Calendar function, if you want to use scheduling, calendar function is handy. It's kind of the same as a normal Outlook calendar. It just shows you which records are in there. The only caveat with the calendar functionality is that you cannot export it to an Outlook calendar or Google Calendar or something like that. It has to be contained within REDCap because that would be a clear HIPAA violation if you could export it outside of REDCap. So, but because of that, it's not as useful. So, the data exports, reports, and stats module is where you're gonna run all your reports and then export them. It looks a little bit like this. If I click on any export, for instance, give me all my data, it's going to give me a pop-up with the selection of which format I want it in. Most people will do in Excel, but if you have one of your favorite statistical programs in here, you can select these and directly export it into a format that you are most comfortable with. These are the de-identifying options I talked about, and some extra options where you can put a timestamp in there if you want. The data import tool does the opposite from data export, obviously. You can import legacy data. Let's say you have that Excel file with 300 people in it and you want to put that into your newly created REDCap project. You can use this tool and import it. It has fairly pervasive instructions on how to do that, with even some templates in there. The data comparison tool will compare two records to each other, but it will only show those variables that are different. So it's really great if you have, for instance, a double data entry and want to say, okay, record 1A and 1B, which variables are different, because that's probably where the discrepancies come from. However, you can only do two records at a time. The logging feature, that's fairly pervasive. Logging feature I talked about earlier. File repository, if you do any exports or if some of your survey participants or users upload any documents, you can find those here. For instance, all the export files, well, no export files yet. User rights and data access groups, more about that later. Record locking customization. You have the ability within REDCap to give certain users the rights to lock certain records. That means that users without any locking rights cannot change that particular form or record anymore. Really handy if you, for instance, have a data entry verification model where you have a couple people doing data entry and then one or two people checking that data for validity. You kind of want to lock that data in there once it's verified, so you don't have to do that over and over again. That's where record locking comes in. E-signature is an extension of that. However, it does not work with the UW NetID system. And I kind of think it's a good thing, because you would need to fill out your password every single time you make a change, which would be annoying if you have a 16-character password like I have. So that doesn't work, so you can safely ignore that. Data quality and resolve issues. Data quality will allow you to run specific queries on your entire data set. For instance, give me all the missing variables for required fields. Or if you want to have, for instance, a specific one, for instance, give me all the records with where the first name variable is Bas. Or anything like, give me all the pregnant males, for instance. Really quick way of double checking the data integrity of your data set. API, application programming interface. It's a way programmers can hook into your REDCap project automatically. So if you want to export data automatically on a nightly basis, for instance, to SPSS, you can set up a job to do that via API. If you don't know how to program or use that, don't bother with it. It's a great extra feature for people that want it. REDCap mobile app is an upcoming feature that is only visible for administrators at this point. They're actually building an iOS and an Android app for REDCap, where you can do offline data capture on a tablet, which is kind of nice. It's coming next year, so this is where you would set that up. These are those bookmarks I talked about. I set these bookmarks in here for everybody, so each project will have this. Then We have the reports underneath there, the specific reports I built. I can click on them and go directly to those. For instance, give me all the mails in my project. Give me the data set with the filter of all the reports. It's kind of handy. Underneath there we have help and information. Help and FAQ will go to the FAQ page. Video tutorials go to the video tutorials page. And we have the suggest a new feature one. Had some trouble with that in the past because people would use that and thinking that they would email me. However, you're emailing the REDCap developers directly, so I don't even see that. So people were mad at me saying like, why didn't you respond to my email? So, well, I didn't get it. So if you want to send me an email, do that to my UW email address or to this link below here. But if you say like, I really want this other feature included in REDCap and you want to shoot that directly to Vanderbilt, feel free to suggest a new feature right there. And we have the project setup page. Under project home, there's a bunch of quick links that you can use. One that I want to highlight is the codebook. This is basically an overview of all your variables within this particular project, including all the structured data, how it was coded, if there is any branching logic associated with it. It's a little bit more human readable than the data dictionary. I've found out that PIs and IRBs really like this because they can actually understand it. So feel free to use this. There's a print page which can allow you to print it as a PDF or just to send it to a printer. Really useful feature. The rest of the things in the project home page is quick links to various things that you should use when you're in production and some overview of your stats. Then the other functionality is handy. There's a bit about the API that most people will ignore. However, project tools is really handy to have. This is where you can copy an entire project. As I said, you can copy everything, including records and users, or you can say, I only want to copy the blank variables and forms, so you can turn those on and off, all these things. This will go through the approval process for me, but I usually approve copy projects right away because, yeah, it's usually valid. Deleting a project is kind of a last resort. When you really want to kill all the data off our REDCap server, you do that. If your project is not active anymore and you don't want it in your project list anymore, I highly advise people to use the archive project button, which will archive it, so it will still live on our servers, you just don't see it in your list anymore. And you can turn any archive project into an active one at any point in time. If you're in development, you also have the erase all data button, which basically erases all the records from your project, which is handy if you have a lot of test records and you want to delete them all at once instead of one by one. However, when you're in production, you don't have this button anymore, for the obvious reason that if you're collecting real-life data, you don't want the one push button where you can delete all your data. So that's that. Project revision is a visual logging feature. But then we get to the project setup page. We'll go through this more in detail right now. So in main project settings, you can do three main things. You can turn on the longitudinal functionality, the survey functionality, and you can change the name and purpose and titles, etc. The things you filled out when you requested the project to begin with. So most people look over this and go, okay, that's great. However, these first two is kind of important to remember. So let's say you want to start up surveys, but you can't find where do I enable surveys? Well, that's here before you can do anything else with it. Longitudinal studies, I referred to them shortly. So longitudinal studies are defined by arms, meaning you can have multiple different arms. Let's say you can have a placebo group and an intervention group, or drug A versus drug B versus drug C. Location A, location B, location C, whatever you want. However, each arm can only is basically its own little mini project within REDCap. So a record can only live in one project, one arm at a time. So within an arm, there are multiple multiple events. You can have one event, you can have 20, you can have 300 events, up to you. Each event will have a number of forms associated with it. So this is really handy, for instance, if you have a clinical measurements form or a specific scoring tool you want to repeat over time. You just have to put in that scoring tool once and then say associate this with my baseline, my month 1, my month 3, my month 6, my month 18, and a study. That way you just basically copy that form multiple times without having to create X amount of copies of that form. The main advantage of using longitudinal studies is it creates smaller lists of forms for people to fill out. Let's say you want to capture that scoring tool 5 times. If you don't use a longitudinal model, you would have to have 5 different forms, one for each event, which gets quite big if you have a somewhat complex longitudinal project. So it gives you a little bit bigger overview in the bigger studies, and it was kind of built for clinical trials. However, it's not a substitution for a clinical trial management system. It's mainly built for those clinical trials that don't have a lot of money, so they don't have the ability to basically own a $100,000 clinical trial management system, but do want to use the clinical trial model to check the validity of their hypotheses. I, for instance, was involved on a CPAP study where they checked 40 people that had breathing problems and were obese to see if they slept better with a CPAP device, and 40 people that didn't. So they had arm 1 with CPAP, arm 2 without, and they just used REDCap to do the data collection. So it didn't cost them a thing, they just needed to basically build it within REDCap, but after they were done, they archived the project and they're done with it. However, I just heard that they're probably going to do a follow-up with that, so they're just going to copy the project and basically have a good template to start out with. Surveys itself then, nice little bridge there. Enable the main project settings. If you forget that, you can set up each and every form in your project as a survey. So let's say you want to, if you look underneath here, you want to set up month 1 data as a survey and month 3, you can do that without impacting month 2 data or the demographics or baseline. So, but if you want to choose to put all of these as a survey, you can do that too, up to you. Each survey can have notifications, so you can have REDCap send you an email once a specific survey has been filled out. Kind of handy. However, if you do that and you send that survey out to 500 people, highly recommend you put a rule in your Outlook calendar, putting it all in one folder, otherwise you're going to get 300 "This survey was just been completed" emails in there. Just a little tip. You can do automatic invitations, basically tell REDCap, like after, for instance, the baseline form has been filled out, wait a month and then send the month 1 follow-up survey. People then get a message saying like, yeah, please fill out this survey with the link in there and everything. You can custom tailor that message saying like, dear so-and-so, you filled out this form a month ago. This is the follow-up. Please feel free to do so. If you have any questions, email me at such and so forth. So really handy. You can put information in there, pipe that automatically in there, and basically make a pre-baked, customized message. There's this thing called a survey queue. If you don't want to use the email functionality but still want to chain multiple surveys together, you can do that. You can make logic in those survey queues, for instance saying like, I have a specific survey for males and a specific survey for females. You want to branch that out and then bring them back into the follow-up surveys. You can do that with the survey queue. There is a new feature that we put in a couple weeks ago called survey reminders. Basically, and I'm really excited about this because I've been asking them for a year and a half about this. You can tell REDCap to send up to 5 reminders with your own custom schedule. So if you send an initial invitation, say like wait 3 days and then send the first reminder, and wait another 3 days and send the second. So you can have 1 reminder or up to 5, up to you. So basically you can nag people to fill out your survey. And then finally, a really handy one is the survey confirmation. A lot of these days, people, when they sign up for something on the internet, they can expect a survey confirmation email like, you successfully subscribed for the REDCap class, for instance. Survey confirmation will allow you to do that for every single survey you put in there. So you can do like you just successfully like entered baseline information for our first event, and then for the follow-up, like thank you for doing this follow-up. Or I've had people using it saying like after they complete an entire series, send them a custom email with an Amazon gift card code. Now we're actually going to design our forms and variables, the meat of it, so to speak. If you want to design a form, you have basically 3 ways of getting that form and the variables in REDCap. The first one, and that's by far the easiest one, is the REDCap shared library that you see below here. Basically this takes you directly to a global library governed by Vanderbilt, which has a bunch of curated, validated forms in there. For instance, I don't know if anybody here heard from about the Promise questionnaires from the Promise Institute. Well, anyway, it's a fairly big institute on the East Coast that makes, for instance, anxiety scoring tools and stuff. So if you want to port one of their scoring tools directly into REDCap, you can look that up in that library and hit import, and it will load it into your project right away, which is kind of handy because it will take you maybe 2 minutes to put in 100 variables. So that's the quickest and easiest way. The other way, and this is probably what you are going to use most of the time, is the online designer. It's been found over here. Online designer is point and click. It's kind of like a wizard. So for each variable, you're going to go to a couple of steps to properly set up that variable. Because it's very point and click, it's suited for less than 30 variables usually. Because if you have more than 30 variables, then it becomes a little bit repetitive, and there's another way of doing that more quickly. However, if you need to do a quick tweak, or need to add a single variable, or just make a couple of changes on the fly, online designer is a really great tool because it's error-proof, so to speak. REDCap won't allow you to do anything that it won't allow, so that's kind of handy. The data dictionary is the way you would go about having a more comprehensive and a bigger project with more variables, so more than 30 variables pretty much. It's kind of like a spreadsheet. It's an Excel comma separated value format, which is just an open source format that any spreadsheet program can tackle pretty much. So if you have your Apple numbers preference, or an OpenOffice or a LibreOffice preference, you can use a comma separated value with that. You don't need an Excel file. It describes metadata, so basically it describes your data variables, and it defines an entire project. I have a horror story about a lady that had a 300 variable project and then wanted to add 2, and she made a data dictionary with just the 2 variables in it, which kind of overrode her 300 variables, which would be a bad thing because she lost all the data. So if you're uploading extra variables, upload the 300 plus 2, basically, and then you're good. However, REDCap will tell you what it's going to do once you upload the data dictionary, and saying like, I'm going to replace these 300 variables with 2 variables now. If you're going to use this, always back up your project beforehand and use the double check on import. If you don't know what the syntax exactly is for the data dictionary, it's found in the FAQ, or you can come to the data dictionary class where I go over this in detail, how to properly use the data dictionary and quickly set it up. If you are proficient with the data dictionary, like I use it a lot, I average about 100 variables an hour. So that will be very quickly done if you have a large project. However, if you're using the online designer, it's a really great way to get familiar with all the different field types in there. You need to set up a couple of different things. The first thing you're going to do in any new field is first select, are you going to add a normal field or a matrix of fields? I'm also going to teach you how to do a matrix of fields later, but first we're going to click on add a field. You're going to see a number of these buttons, and basically the location where you click on that button is where the new variable is going to live. So for instance, if you have a first and a last name and you want to put the middle name in between, you click on the button in between those two. And then the first thing you get asked is like, what field type do you want to make this variable? Well, you ask like, what's a field type? These are field types. Most of them are fairly standard. The text box is kind of the catch-all field type. You can put anything in there from names, email addresses to dates and integers and numbers. The text box has this cool feature where you can actually add validation to it. So you can tell REDCap saying like, okay, whatever gets entered in this text box can only be a number between 0 and 24, for instance, if you're doing an hour. Or it has to be an email validation saying it actually doesn't double check if it's a valid email address as in pings the server, but it does check the format, like is this in blah@blah.com. So that's a really great way of basically forcing people to fill out what you want them to fill out. The bigger, badder brother of the text box is the note box, which you can see over here. And a note box is nothing more than a bigger text box with a little bit more room. However, it doesn't have any validations on it. I use this one a lot, for instance, for general comments, or if you want to copy and paste a clinical note in there so you can abstract it later. So that, a note box is really, really great for that. You can actually expand it a little bit so it's the entire length or the entire width of a page, so you have even more space to put information in. Then we have basically our three structured variables, the radio buttons. Everybody should be familiar with radio buttons if you ever use the internet. You can select one option from a list of options and that's it. The drop down is a variation of that. Instead of all the options on there, it's on a drop down. Do that one if you, for instance, have more than 5 options, because if you have 3 options, radio buttons are really great because you can display them on the screen, but if you have a drop down, you can put more data in there and it just expands. The checkboxes are kind of like radio buttons, however, you can select multiple answers. So please check all that apply will be a checkbox. And we have a couple of predefined radio buttons, specifically the yes, no, and the true, false radio buttons. Because those are questions that get asked a lot, so that you don't have to program them in every single time. You just select that field type and REDCap will add the yes, no, or the true or false. Yes is coded as 1, no is coded as 0, true is 1, false is 0. These are normal statistical conventions, so your statistician will be very happy with you if you use that. And we have the file upload button. The file upload button is basically a way for you, the user, the data entry person, or a survey participant to upload a file up to 12 megabytes. So this could be that nasty photo of that mole in that dermatology study you want to capture, or a signed consent form as a PDF, or so some other document you want to upload. However, anything over 12 megabytes is just too big. We don't have the room to store that, so have some other way of getting that information to you. So no MRIs, which are usually in north of a couple gigabytes. So that's the field upload. There's actually a specific new subtype of the field upload called the signature field. They actually just put that in there, and I haven't uploaded the slide yet, but it will allow you to, if you're on an iPad for instance, just to sign your signature with your finger, or if you're on a computer, use the mouse to do the same thing. So if the IRB is giving you a hard time about signatures, you could use that. It just captures that signature as a little mini picture file and then stores it in the record. Then we have the slider field, which looks like this. Slider fields are really great for subjective questions, saying like, how sick are you feeling today? Like really miserable to like, I'm feeling great. So the slider will land somewhere between those two labels and will give you a value between 0 and 100. So yeah, it's a little bit more specific than, for instance, a Likert scale, which only has 7 points. Then we have calculated fields, which will allow you to take numbers inputted in text boxes, for instance, and do a calculation with it. For instance, if you want to calculate a BMI, it's used for that. If you want to do a scoring tool and calculate the score, the total score, you can do that with a calculated field. However, some people try to use the calculated fields to get a jump on their analysis to begin with. which is fine. However, you should realize that the calculated field will only calculate when that form is open in your browser. So let's say you pull data from different forms and that doesn't get updated until you open that form again. So that's a little bit of a hassle. As a result, I always advise people, if you're going to use calculated fields, only use them if they actually further your data capture at that point in time. For instance, if you have a couple of follow-up questions based on BMI, it's good to calculate BMI, so you can say, okay, you're over 30, your BMI, have you thought about losing weight, for instance? So that's what a calculated field can do. It can also only end in a number, so you cannot say, okay, if this logic becomes true, display green in a calculated field. Then we have, which is technically not a field type, a descriptive field, which is a variable that doesn't contain any data. It just contains either a picture or a blob of text, which is really great for instructions text, for instance, like, thank you for filling out the survey. We now would like to ask you to do X. And we also have a section header, which you can see as this yellow bar here. It's just a way of making, of cutting up a survey or a form into different sections. So you can, it's a little bit more readable. And finally, as a little Easter egg, we have the dynamic SQL field, which is only available to administrators, because you have to put a custom SQL code in there that pulls data from a different project or a different table and it displays it as a drop-down menu. This is really great, for instance, if you have one of those adverse events projects that are outside of your main data set, but you still want to link them back to your main data set via study ID, for instance. So I've done numerous projects where you would have that. The adverse event would have the drop-down with just the names and the study IDs of all the participants in the other one, and that gets filled automatically every time you add a new participant to the main database. So that's quite handy to put in there. There's a really handy video, 4-minute video in the Online Designer if you forget what field types are all about, that you can review once you forget everything I said about this in 3 weeks. So once you select the field type, REDCap is going to ask you a couple different things based on the field type, but it's pretty much always going to ask you for a field label. So the field label can be like, what's your age? How many days has it been since you had a hamburger? Whatever you want to put in there. Field labels are kind of special because you can put HTML code in there, so you can mess with the formatting. You can make it bolder, bigger, give it a different font, whatever you want. If you're proficient with HTML, check it out. So that's the field label. There's also a variable name, which is can be the same as the field label. If you just have a field label age, variable name will probably also be age. However, the variable name has to be unique. So it has to be unique across the entire project. So you cannot have two variables both with the variable name age. It will be h1 and h2, for instance. It always has to be lowercase or an underscore or a number. It cannot start with a number. And like I said, it has to be unique. If you're not sure about how to properly construct variable names, ask a statistician. They have opinions about this, a lot of them. So they definitely know how to make those. If you have a text box and you put validation in there, you select validation. Certain validations have a minimum and maximum. You can have part of a minimum or only a minimum or only a maximum or both. There is a required field, basically yes/no question, like is this particular variable required? Kind of handy, for instance, if you want to know somebody's date of birth, you can force them to fill that out. Same goes for an identifier. Is this an identifier, yes or no? That's how you tell REDCap, okay, this is an identifier. If you do a de-identified export, take this one out. Some custom alignment allows you to mess a little bit with the look and feel of a question. Check that out. I have 4 different options. A field note, really handy. If you, for instance, have a date validation on there, people cannot read your mind. They kind of need to know what the date format is, so you can put the date format in the field note, then appears underneath the text box. And finally, options. If you have one of those structured variables like drop-downs or radio buttons, you kind of need to define the options for those things, so you can do that there. So let's go create some variables. So I'm in my demo project. I go to the project setup page. This is usually where you land, and I go to the online designer. The shared library is over here, and the data dictionary is over here. But the online designer will give you this this list of forms. At this point, I have 4 forms in there. And let's go to my demographics. I can just click on that. I can rename these forms whatever I want. And this is what I call the exploded view. So you kind of see all the options you have in there. You can also do a preview mode, which looks a little bit more like the data entry form you're going to see later on. And these are where these questions are. So the little pencil is edit a variable. This is copy a variable, so you can quickly copy stuff. Branching logic, about which I'm going to talk a little bit more. Moving a variable between forms or within the form itself. And who wants to venture a guess what the big fat red X means? Delete, yay, very good. So if I delete something, it's going to ask me like, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And I said, oh, I made a mistake, I want middle name back. I can do that by clicking on add a field, and it's going to ask me for a field type. So it's the drop-down menu. Well, middle name is a text box, so I kind of want to do that. If the form in this particular form is a survey, you also have the option of putting in a question number, so you can custom number your questions. Really handy if you have some skip logic in there that messes with the order of questions. However, for now I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give it a middle name. And if you paid attention, you saw that variable name was automatically filled out. You can turn that off by unchecking this, or you can edit this at any point in time without messing with the field label. That's just called mname. It's a little bit quicker, not as messy. Is there a validation? This is the list of validations we have. For instance, if I want to do an integer, it actually gives me a minimum and a maximum. You fill that out there. Same for certain dates. You can have a minimum date and a maximum date. For the rest, email, I talked about that. The phone for the US is the 10-digit phone, and the zip code is the 5-digit code instead of the 9-digit variety. However, this is a middle name, so I don't want to have any validations because it's a middle name. Well, I'm not going to make it required because not everybody has a middle name. I don't, so I don't want to fill it out. But it is a clear identifier, so I do want to check it as an identifier. This is the alignment feature. If I mess with it, it will actually look up differently, and I can see a field note saying like no initials, because people tend to just put an A or B in there. I hit save, and I now created the middle name variables. It looks a little bit different from the one up top and below because I messed with the custom alignment. I say like, I don't really like that. I wanted to make it look like the same as the other ones. I just go back to the default, which is right horizontal. Now it looks the same. So that's how you make a variable. If you want to mess up the order, you can also just drag and drop. For instance, say, no, I want last name first, and then middle name, and then first name as the last, so you just change the order that way. However, if you want to migrate variables between forms, you will need to use the move button. It will give you move the field to another location. So that's how that works. Any questions about this before we move on? No? Fairly straightforward. Matrix fields. Matrix fields are not so new anymore. They put them in about a year ago. Basically what they do is they bundle a couple of radio buttons or checkboxes together and put them in a pretty matrix. So you don't have to, for instance, if you have a matrix, create 10 different radio buttons that all look the same underneath each other. It just looks a little bit nicer. It's fairly quick and easy to set up. It groups questions quite nicely. You can put logic in there to basically show individual rows or hide them. And you can even make a matrix into a ranking matrix, for instance, say like for these 5 different aspects of your life, rank them from 1 to 5. Then you can only select the first rank once for one of the 5 options. Favorite foods is usually my example. So if I want to do that, I add a matrix field, for instance. I give it a header, for instance, favorite foods. So I like fries. And what's somebody else's favorite food? A milkshake. Anything else? Sushi. Sushi, that's a new one. I usually have somebody yell beer, so that's a good one too. So I just add a couple rows, and then I come to the choices box. This works the exact same way in a normal radio button. For instance, if I want to label these with favorite, I can say least favorite, second, third, and most favorite. So what I've just done is per row or per line, basically, I've defined the label for an option. If I click anywhere outside of this, REDCap will actually indent these automatically and give them a raw value, because all the options are always coded with a raw value and a label. The raw value can be pretty much anything, same as the label, but it always has to have both of them. Why do you have a raw label? People ask me. Well, it's easier, for instance, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to do analysis on that than most favorite, little less favorite, least favorite. So that's a good way of getting into. So I mostly use just numbers for my raw values. But if you, for instance, want to say, like, yeah, I want to make this 4A, you can do that. The order of the choices is defined by the order they are in here, not so much the raw values. Then I need to basically select if it's a radio button or a checkbox. Only for radio buttons is the ranking thing enabled, so let's turn ranking on and then give it a group name, food. And then it looks like this. And it looks in the preview a little bit like this. So least favorite, 2, 3, most favorite. There's also an extra icon in there called a stop button. The stop button will only show up in surveys. And what it basically does, it will allow you to say which of these answers grinds the survey to a halt, basically makes a person ineligible, for instance. So for instance, have you ever been pregnant? And if you need people to be not pregnant, for instance, you can say like, if it's yes, or prefer not to answer, stop the survey. They can't go any further. So you can screen people out that way. So that's a way, it's kind of rigorous to do that, but some people prefer it, and the option is in there, so feel free to make use of it. And people will actually get a pop-up saying like, you chose an answer that basically stops the survey, so you cannot submit it with this answer. So test it out. Any questions about this? One thing I forgot to mention, if you want to, for instance, test out some of the ranking features, you will have to make a test record in there. Same with branching logic. Branching logic will come to that, hides or shows certain variables, and in your design view you kind of want to see all your variables. So if you then hide variables, that would be bad. So if you do some of the more advanced features like ranking or branching logic, you'll need to do a couple test records to make sure it all works okay. Same with calculated fields. Okay, branching logic. As I said, used for hiding or showing fields. It's based on logic, so very simple logic. If a certain thing is true, show the field. If it's not true, hide it. However, it can get quite complex with a lot of ands and ors. So like, if the person is female and pregnant, ask like, how many kids did you have? If the person is female and pregnant, or has been pregnant in the past, stuff like that. You can. I've seen 50 different if-thens in there, so they get quite complex. I do recommend keeping them simple, mainly because that's easier to debug for yourself and make sure it all works. So They are limited to a project, so you can reference any variable that's been entered in the entire project. Doesn't matter if it's in a different form or a different event, you can get to that. However, if it's in a different project, that's off limits. There's a couple of ways of putting it in there. There is advanced branching logic syntax, where you can actually type the logic in and check the FAQ for the syntax you need to use. Or you can use the drag and drop builder, which most people use, and you can't go wrong with that one. So let's try one of those. So if there's branching logic associated with a variable, it will actually show that in a little tag in your online designer, so you actually know which ones have branching logic. What's a little bit different for some people to get their heads wrapped around is that you put the logic in the variable you want to hide. So it's not so much the originating variable. A lot of people, for instance, would have put the logic for gender to hide the pregnant variable, because that's how they make protocols. It's a way some people think. So REDCap works the other way around. You put your logic in the destination variable, as I like to call it. I click on the green arrow and it will show me the syntax for gender. If I delete this, and I hit save, then there's no branching logic, so I've removed it. If I want to basically put that back in there, I can first select a certain form, so any of the forms in here will actually change the options down here. If it's a text field, it will actually say, okay, for email, what's your email you want to put in, blah@blah.com. So this will only show up when the email is that specific email address. Or you can say it's smaller or bigger than that specific thing. If it's a structured field, for instance, gender male or gender female, you just have to drag it in there and it will show you if this gender is female, then it's good. You don't have to do anything about that anymore. If you, for instance, want to say, let's say, and fries is 2, so go back, Jenna. You actually see up here that the logic has an AND in there because you have 2 specific statements that have to be true. You can also check, sorry about that, that's really annoying. I can't turn them off for some reason. If you want to say like either a person is female or they selected 2 for the fries option, you can select any. Then the AND changes to an OR and you can make it that way. If you want a combination of the 2, ANDs and ORs, you will need to use the advanced branching logic syntax because the logic builder itself is not smart enough to do that yet. So yeah, it's fairly easy to wrap your hand around it. If you want to know more about branching logic syntax and how to build that yourself, come to the Daily Dictionary class. I'll explain exactly how to do various things and what to how to mess with it. So, but let's just keep it as gender. Kind of makes sense for a pregnant question. So that's how branching logic works. Very simple, can get infinitely more complex if you keep on going. So, provided that you've finished all your forms and variables, you might want to check out some of the modules and customizations. The auto numbering is especially handy. REDCap will just, for every study ID, do a next sequential one in there. So if you start with record 1, the next one will be record 2, etc., etc., etc. You don't have to think about study IDs. REDCap will assign them for you. Scheduling, turning the scheduling feature on and off. If you're interested in that, otherwise just leave it off. For randomization, REDCap doesn't have true randomization. You can upload an allocation table and use that to randomize your study, but it's not ideal. If you're thinking of using randomization, shoot me an email and I can probably advise you on a better way to do that. If you're using surveys and specific automatic invitations, you need to use the specifier specific email fields because REDCap needs to know which of your forms, in which of your forms the variable is where you captured somebody's email address. If you don't do that, REDCap doesn't know where to send the email, so kind of important that you define that. It will give you a drop-down menu with only the text fields that have the email validation on it, so yeah, please put one in there. Some additional customizations. You can order the records by a different field, for instance, last name, date of birth instead of study ID. You can set a custom record label. Some people don't like study IDs, or they like study IDs, but they want to have an extra label, for instance, last name, date of birth. You can make a combination label of that, just to find records more easily. You can turn the data history widget on and off. The data history widget is basically a mini log for each specific variable in a specific record. So for instance, if you put in, yes, this person was pregnant, but then you put in, no, that was incorrect, it's no, that actually shows up in the history widget as like, okay, you changed it to yes and you changed it to no at this point in time, yeah, and in this date. The display the today now button is for if you have text validation for date timestamps. It automatically puts a little date picker next to it, but you can turn that off if you don't like that. If you're feeling particularly paranoid about your coworkers, you can turn on the require a reason for editing existing records. They basically have to, yeah, give up a reason and type something in. The final one is data resolution workflow and field comments. These are basically, you can put a comment next to any variable in any record. For let's say you have a study for the homeless and you're asking, okay, what's your address? They're probably not going to give you an address. You might doubt their sincerity in that sense. So instead of having to create a separate variable to say that like I'm not sure about this address, you can just put a comment there next to there that everybody can see that has access to the project, saying, okay, I don't trust this one. The data resolution one is a little bit the big brother of that. It will actually allow you to open up an issue and assign that to somebody else in your team, saying like, please double check this. So you can, yeah, you can totally follow up on all the issues that might arise during data entry. User rights, talked about it earlier. As I said, very powerful tool. You can fine-tune specific rights. There are options, for instance, to put in expiration dates. So if you have a bunch of med students that are only working for you for 3 months, chances are you're going to remember adding them to your project, but 3 months down the line when they stop, you're going to forget removing them. So putting an expiration in there will actually help that. REDCap will automatically kick them out at that time. If they're still working for you at that time, they will let you know that they don't have access anymore. Trust me on that one. So you can get fairly granular. You can give people access to certain forms or not, but you can also set up roles. So if you, for instance, have those medical students that are doing data entry for you, you can create a specific role for data entry medical student where you just add people to, and they take over the privileges of that particular role. That means that you don't have to set up the same rights over and over again for all these people. You just set it up once and then just start adding people. It's a really handy feature. Data access groups are great for double data entry or for multiple sites, or for both if you want that. What it basically does, it's separate from user rights, but it cordons off specific subsets of records. So let's say you three are in a data access group and you four are in another one. All the records you guys enter cannot be seen by them, and vice versa. So that's really great if you, for instance, have multiple sites and want all of them to see only their own records and not get a HIPAA violation. So that's a really, really good one for that. So user rights can be found in the application menu, and it will look a little bit like this. You always get an overview of all the users that are in there, with all the roles that are in there. I made a lot of roles because this is my training project. You can assign multiple people to the same role, or you can take people and give them a customized set of privileges, like Kathy Long in this one. If an account is suspended because they left the university, you can either remove them for your project or they will get the account suspended tag in there. You can quickly get an overview of what rights they have. Green check mark, it means they have them. X means that they don't. Which access group they're in, if there's an expiration date, etc. If I, for instance, let's see, if I want to remove somebody, I have to edit their user privileges and hit remove. And I want to add that person as in a new role, for instance, because I made a mistake. I can just type in a partial name, Kathy Long, and it will give me a list of all the people that match that. Select that will automatically put in the correct username. I assign it to the role, for instance, data entry, and now I've assigned that person to that specific role. If you want to, for instance, add somebody with custom user rights, shall we do Sunya? Add them with custom user rights, you'll see this, this window. Expiration date up top, just put in a date. It will give you a date picker if you click on that. The highest level privileges, which I kind of call the keys to the castle. If you give them project design and setup rights, they can change any variables and forms, so that would be bad if they have no right doing that. If you give them the rights to change user rights, they can also change their own user rights, so you give them access to everything, so be careful with that one. And some data exporting, which is kind of important if you don't want people to take your data out of your project, because once it's outside of REDCap, I cannot do anything about it because it's outside of our control. Some other privileges, mostly about applications. This one is fairly important to create records, rename records, and delete records. Standard, create records is checked, but the other ones are not, because if you delete a record, that would be bad if you do that inadvertently. So everybody doesn't have that right by default. If you need to delete a specific record, go to your user rights, give yourself the right, delete the record, and then take that right away again, so you protect yourself from inadvertent deletion. Well, this is about record locking, but this is where it gets interesting. This is your data entry rights for all your forms. If you basically have 4 options, no access means that that person won't even see the form. So if you want to blind people, put all the identifiers in one form and don't give them the rights to see that form. And this also pertains to the exports, so they won't even be able to export the demographics field. Read-only is what we just talked about. View and edit is the default, which you can basically fill in and then edit anything. If it's a survey and it's been filled out by a participant, there's an extra option, edit survey responses, which basically allows you to edit any response after the fact. Otherwise, you won't have that option because they want to safeguard that that's actually the response. However, I've had people asking me about, like, yeah, I gave you my address, but my address changed. Can you change that in my record? At that point, it's kind of handy to be able to change that. And then you can check or uncheck if you want to notify this user that they have now access. So since this is the account of my boss, I don't want to spam her too much, so let's not add her. But if I add her to this list. Data access groups also found in the user rights window. It looks a little bit like this. I have a bunch of different data access groups. You can just add one. You can vary users between them. For instance, Christy, I want to assign Christy to Olympia. Hit assign. Now Christy is assigned to Olympia. This count will actually show you how many records are in that specific data access group. There are actually 5 records that are not assigned to any access group. I can assign them manually, but if, for instance, Christy at this point goes into this project and creates a new record, that record will automatically be put in the Olympia data access group that only people in Olympia or people that are outside the data access groups can see. So, make sense? If you have more questions about this, feel free to email me. Then the pre-production checklist. Design your data collection instruments, test, and test again. Have somebody else test your stuff. There's nothing as annoying as having to come back and go through the double check process all over again. Assign user rights and move the project to production for that. For that double check. When you do that, it's going to give you a pop-up with a lot of text, and people don't tend to read that text, so that's why I'm highlighting it here. There's a check for identifiers. It basically goes through all your variable names and sees like, does it match one of the standard identifiers that we have on file, like SSN and name and that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that. Actually, nobody ever does, but it's in there, so it can be nice. However, what is important is the test content can be deleted one. This is a checkbox that's automatically checked because REDCap assumes that when you move to production from development, all the records that you've entered so far are test data, and you want to wipe that clean. So it gives you the option to do that automatically. If for some reason you didn't, that was not the case, and you have actual data in there, uncheck that, and then it will go through without deleting anything. So kind of important to know. Some practical notes: have IRB approval, kind of makes sense, and be ready to screen and enroll or survey participants. There's nothing as annoying if you move to production and 4 weeks down the line, before you actually start enrolling people, your PI comes back and says like, oh yeah, I want to add these three forms. So you can do that, but you have to go through the approval process. If you, by mistake, went into production too soon and you want to go back to development, shoot me an email, I can move you back. The IRB will allow you to develop your project in REDCap as long as you don't collect any data. So you can have, that month-long process while you're getting IRB approval, during that process, spend that time developing your REDCap project, so once you do get that approval, you're ready to go. That's a little pro tip. Making changes in production, covered it very briefly. This is the step process. So you go to the online designer, you enter draft mode. It's a big yellow box, you can't really miss it there. You make your modifications, you review it yourself, and then you hit on the same big yellow box up there, submit changes for approval. I will get an email with an overview of all the changes you want to make. If it's okay, I approve it. If not, I'll let you know what's the matter. Some things that you have a little heads up on what could go wrong. So if you change a variable name or a form name, or delete a variable or form, that could cause you to lose data. So just a heads up for that. Changing choices in dropdowns and checkboxes, etc. Will do that. Sometimes field types changes will mess with you. For instance, if you go from a yes, no to a radio button or the other way around, sometimes that messes stuff up. Removing an event or a form from an event will basically delete all the data from that event, and modifying some specific project settings. For instance, if you turn Longitudinal off, you basically delete all your events besides the first one, which would be bad. However, once you completed all of that, there's the data entry process, the thing where it actually matters. So there's a couple different ways of entering data. You have the classic way, which looks like this, just a list of forms you fill out one by one, only one time per record for the in the project. There's a soft requirement if you're a user, meaning that if you made a field required, and it's a soft requirement, you will get a pop-up saying like, you need to fill this field out, but there's a button saying like, I want to ignore this one. So that's a soft requirement. Most people that do data entry are trained enough to know when they can ignore that safely or when they actually have to go back and fill it out. In survey mode, the advantage is that you don't have to have a login, but there's a hard requirement, meaning that you cannot submit the survey until you filled out all the required fields in accordance to the validation. So you do have to fill out a date of birth if you made that required. Surveys themselves link to a single form. You can change multiple forms together, but each form will have its own unique link. That's how REDCap figures out which survey belongs to which form or which record. This is a really great way. You can use surveys in conjunction with longitudinal data entry. If you have a longitudinal project, you get a list of forms per event in a nice little event grid, which allows you to navigate quickly through different events and to different forms. And it also has a soft requirement. There's also this thing called a data entry dashboard. The data entry dashboard is basically a very big table with a column for each event form combination and a row for each record. So you can quickly see for a bunch of different records what's been filled out and what hasn't been filled out.
This is completely optional, by the way. You don't have to use it. However, I see a lot of people use it because it gives them a nice little overview. There's different status forms or status symbols that I will demonstrate now. If you go to the record status dashboard over here, it's under data collection, you will see something like this. If it's gray, that means that it's the space is reserved, but there's no data in there. Nobody has done anything with it. It's still blank. Red means there's some data in there. Some people have messed with it, but it might not have been complete. At the bottom of each form, there's a thing called form completion status drop down, which goes from incomplete, unverified, and complete. Again, this is optional to use. REDCap will only automatically change from gray to red if you put some data in there, but for the rest it doesn't do anything. Red corresponds with incomplete, yellow with unverified, and green with complete. So if I, for instance, change this to unverified and hit save record in the record status dashboard, this will now be yellow. There's a legend up here where you can see which icon stands for what. If you have a survey or something was filled out as a survey, because any survey can also be filled out as a normal form, there's a different icon. It's just a green dot with a check mark in it. So you can see, okay, there was a survey filled out. So you can quickly see who filled out my surveys and when. And this is a good example, by the way, besides the study idea of an optional label that I just put in there. If I, for instance, want to go to a data entry grid, I can, for instance, go to Mr. Putin, and this is, for instance, an event grid for this particular study ID. You can see exactly how far this person is in his data collection. He filled out the enrollment forms. Well, he skipped month 1, but there's some data in month 2, and month 3 is unverified for some reason, and he hasn't reached the end of study yet. So it's a really quick way, if you use the status icons, to see where specific records are, and it really helps data entry people. Okay, well, that's my spiel, and I'm right on time. There are a couple of advanced classes. I mentioned them here and there. The data dictionary one deals primarily with the data dictionary, some branching logic, and how to import and export data, especially handy if you have legacy data that you want to put into REDCap. The best practices one deals with a little bit more user rights. It's kind of a catch-all for all the best practices we've picked up on with REDCap. And if you want to learn how to use longitudinal studies and combine them with surveys, then the third one will be a really good option. When these classes are held, you can find on the REDCap class schedule. Most of you signed up via registration anyway, so that's where that data is. If you can't make it for some reason, we are going to record them pretty soon, so then they're going to be online, and all the slides for all those classes are already online. So if there's any other questions, feel free to come after class for me. I'll demonstrate stuff. Otherwise, have a great lunch, and thank you for your attention.